a little trick. Clean the legs. And you've instantly got a clearer picture. Well, when I saw, I've got a bit of the COVID weeping. Dropping everyone into breakout rooms. Welcome to Be Video Confident live show. And today I've got a very exciting guest, Marek Pruszewicz, Director Communications at NewGlobe.
Hello.
Marek builds communication strategy, digital transformation, branding, leads campaigns, crisis communications, internal communications, change communications, and leadership support, plus all forms of content creation for NewGlobe. Brilliant, mate. So what is NewGlobe?
Hello there. NewGlobe is a social enterprise that works in global education, and most of its work is in sub-Saharan Africa. So the main part of its work is supporting national and state level governments in African countries who are determined to transform their primary education systems. It's called basic education generally. Primary isn't always a term that's used widely. That's what we'd call it in the UK. And so these are governments who say learning standards in our primary schools aren't good enough. We need to transform it quickly and at scale across hundreds or even thousands of schools. And we want to see results very, very quickly. We want to see literacy and numeracy rates improve really, really quickly. And we know how to do that. We go in and support them to do that at every step of the process. And we're currently working in countries across Africa. Our biggest current market is in Nigeria, where we're working with several state level governments on programs that they are running, and we're their technical support.
Wow. That is a really big enterprise.
Yeah, there's about 1 million kids in schools that we're supporting now.
My goodness.
From Kenya in the east all the way to Nigeria and Liberia in the west. So yeah, it's a lot.
Wow. So how do they access that? Is it all online?
No. These are state schools in the main. And what we do is we provide an entire system. So that starts with teacher training and coaching and ongoing supervision, all of it bespoke, lesson planning, lesson delivery, and crucially, a really simple way for the education boards who are driving these changes to gather data where previously they haven't had it. So the kind of data we're able to help them gather is around teachers being in school, teaching the right lesson, completing lessons, electronic register of kids, and then kind of end of term testing as well to see how much progress they're making. It's all about improving the outcome for kids, and in sub-Saharan Africa that is really, really important. So the World Bank estimates that something like 70% of children in sub-Saharan Africa currently can't read even a basic text at the age of 10. So they're in what the World Bank calls learning poverty.
Gosh.
The vast majority of kids in low and middle income countries are in school. So something like 90% of them are in school. Yes, that's still 10% who aren't. That's still a lot of kids. But the vast majority are in school. The problem isn't that they're not in school. The problem is they're not learning.
Gosh, yeah.
So it's about transforming the outcomes for them. And these programs are instigated and led by very committed political leaders who've said, look, this is a priority for me. It's these outcomes are not good enough. We have to do something, and we have to do it urgently to improve the outcomes for our kids. And we're very lucky to be able to help them do that.
And are all the lessons in the local language or in English? How do you work?
So we work in markets where the local language is English generally, though we will also work in Kenya, and so there it's English and Swahili. So yeah, they are that's the lesson of the local lesson of the local language, of instruction.
Well, that certainly makes it easier to kind of keep standards. Well, it's easier. I mean, it doesn't mean it's impossible to do multiple languages, but having one common language certainly helps with the data gathering and the feedback as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's about really arming the education authorities with information, so they can gather and the information and tell whether the achievements they want to see are actually taking place. And that's the kind of thing we take for granted in the Northern Hemisphere. There's very, very little gathering and use of contemporaneous data in education in low and middle income countries still. There's very little of it, and that's surprising to me. There's rightly been a massive drive and remains a massive drive to get kids into school and attending school. But I think the focus is shifting now increasingly as well to making sure that when they're in school, they're actually learning.
Yeah. And we've never had this conversation before, but how does that fit in with people who are like neurodiverse? Is that something that you've got to take into account, or is just the drive just a general education?
So the programs belong to are led by the government education bodies. So the policies are theirs, but they're very inclusive.
Yeah.
And one of the really impressive things about them also is that they deliver improvements, very clear and quick improvements across all kind of groups. So they are very equitable. They deliver education equity, and that is really impressive as well, because what you find in an awful lot of interventions in education is the easy thing to do is to take the kids that are already doing pretty well or come from the best supported domestic backgrounds, the richest backgrounds, and make them do even better. That's probably the easier end of the transformation scale. The harder thing is to make sure that you're taking all kids with you, and these programs have got a really good record of doing that.
Wow. This also sort of really shows me how important your role is as directing all those communications for such a big remit. I mean, it's a massive company.
It's quite diverse. There are a lot of different programs, and although the majority of the work we do these days, easily the majority, is in supporting state education programs, where the schools are state schools, the teachers are employed by the state. That isn't the only thing we do. So we also have our own community schools in underserved communities, Kenya, some in Uganda, Andhra Pradesh in India, and some in Nigeria. And there it's, actually we'll talk about this slightly later, but there it's a very different set of stakeholders, because there you're dealing directly with parents. Whereas when you're talking about working at the level of an entire education system, the stakeholders actually are the partners you're working with, the partners you're supporting. So they are the education bodies and the governments that you're working with. So a very different audience actually for the comms.
Wow, fantastic! My goodness, I sort of have looked at the website. We've spoken. I just didn't realise the detail of the reach that you're able to, and the impact you're able to give to so many countries across the world.
But there's a lot of work to do in this area. There are, again, I think UNESCO, the World Bank estimates there are 350 million kids at the moment who are in school but not learning. And so we're scratching the surface at the moment. There's a lot more to be done. And before I did this job, I worked for a global federation of family planning organizations, so in what's called sexual and reproductive health. And in global health, there are huge numbers of indicators, national indicators, standardized in the way they're gathered and have been for decades. So things like maternal mortality, infant mortality, life expectancy. In global education, there isn't one. To date, there isn't a single one. And so there are, there's lots of data gathered, but there isn't yet. And I found this really surprising when I started working in this field. There isn't yet kind of agreed standardization and data gathering across the board. It just doesn't happen in an awful lot of places, and that is that's a big issue, I think, because if you're not gathering the data, you can't actually measure the progress.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the courses that I run for the University of the Arts London and for Thompson is data visualization. And the longer that I've been running the courses, I've just realized the importance of data and data collection. Not just that, but communicating the data, getting that across to people.
Yeah.
And the things that you can pull out of data, you can really build up an amazing story and really understand not just results, but also this context you can pull out. And
so a really basic example is teacher absenteeism is a real problem again in sub-Saharan Africa. So the World Bank, I think, again here estimates that something like 50% of lessons don't happen because the teachers aren't there.
Gosh.
So the kids aren't being taught. Most fundamental point is the teacher has to be there to do the teaching. In the programs we support, that's not the case, because the teachers all are equipped with handheld tablets which work on low connectivity. So they're working in a 2G environment, which is important because of the kind of places we're supporting education programs. But it means when a teacher is on site because they registered themselves. When they started teaching a lesson, and you actually know which lesson they're teaching. So you suddenly go from having a situation where you're not even sure that your teacher is in school to having a plethora of data to help you measure and gauge improvement.
It also, some data, absenteeism is hearsay. I'm not saying everyone's innocent, but there is hearsay. Were they there or weren't they? We don't know. Somebody said there were, somebody said there wasn't. But if you've got that login, that they're there, and where they're at, what stage they're at. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Wow, the innovation in NewGlobe is fantastic.
It's called. I mean, there's a phrase for it, EdTech, education technology, and it's a kind of sector all of its own in global education. My main role is to look after every aspect of communications for NewGlobe. So stakeholder comms, external comms, crisis comms if required, our social, our digital space. So we are on, Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, our website. But we also have websites, social accounts with all the programs we work with, and our own community schools program, which is called Bridge International Academies. And that's in 4 countries, so they all have their own programs. And so it's a real plethora, again, of platforms and channels. And so my responsibility is directly for the NewGlobe ones, but to support all my in-country colleagues in the work they're doing with all of these individual program brands and platforms. Does that make sense?
So you're really playing on your journalistic background.
Yeah, and also
and your TV
I've got a lot of experience.
Well.
I spent 20 years at the BBC in BBC News, and I did a lot of work there, for instance, with the World Service and with the World Service Language Services. So I've got a lot of experience of working across a lot of different countries simultaneously, a lot of different time zones, and doing a lot of that remotely. At IPPF, although I worked for the Global Federation, we had at that point about 170 national member associations. So again, it was very much about working with an awful lot of organizations remotely across the whole world. So I've got a lot of experience of doing that, working remotely, working across different markets, different time zones, different cultures. So that is hopefully helpful in this current role.
I was at the BBC when the World Service TV started.
Yeah, so that then morphed into something called BBC World News. Yeah. And I was editor on that for 3 years, I think. That's one of the places I
think this is one of the times we missed each other.
Yeah, so I worked for 3 years on World News and also for 8 years as an assistant editor and then an editor on what was then BBC News 24. But these days it's just called the BBC News Channel. Yeah. So I think I've edited every minute of every day on both those channels at one point or another.
Wow. And that really is a real global understanding. And how to communicate with people across the globe, which, again, it's my big hobby horse is if you understand your audience, then you can communicate much more effectively.
I think that's right. And there's, simple example for those two channels. If you're broadcasting solely in the UK, you'll be talking about somebody called the Chancellor of the Exchequer. If you're broadcasting globally, you'll be talking about somebody called the Finance Minister, because nobody outside the UK knows what the Chancellor of the Exchequer means. Another classic way to tell whether you're watching an international news channel or domestic news channel is when the weather's bad. Because when the weather's bad, the domestic news channel will just roll wheel to wheel snow or whatever it is. And that looks ludicrous on the global channel. Yeah. Unless it's an absolutely massive catastrophe, you would not see BBC World News doing an hour on, trains not running in the north of England. Well, really important stories to people locally, globally, just not significant.
Yeah, I remember the first time I was teaching in data visualization course in the Middle East. And I gave them an assignment to do, and the team drew a line graph. And I said, no, it's completely wrong. That is completely wrong. And they all just looked at me and said, no, that's completely right. Because the line graphs that I was teaching were moving from the left of the screen to the right.
They were doing right to left.
And they were doing it the opposite direction. I was saying, no, that looks like sales are falling. I saying, no.
So, one of my favorite roles ever at the BBC was to create the first multilingual video team within World Service languages. So historically, World Service and the World Service language services, so the BBC has all for many years broadcast in multiple languages. I'm not sure many people in the UK realise that, but it has. And at that time, when I was there, broadcasting in 27 foreign languages, I think it's about 37 now. But historically, that news was delivered on radio, shortwave. With the advent of the digital revolution, all of those services began to do at least some of their work digitally on digital platforms. And they all, as a result of that, realized that they needed to get into video. So you're not going to succeed as a language service on a website if all you're putting on there is audio and text. It's video is the dominant medium on these platforms. So they all started making video, but they all started making video individually. And what would happen is you would get a feed in from, I don't know, Reuters, let's say, and it would be some great pictures of, I don't know, a huge number of crabs in the sea somewhere off Japan. And they'd all make the same video, just voiced in their individual languages. And not necessarily fantastically well, because these are services with small resources to make video. And you would see the same video being edited 12 times. And that was just ridiculously inefficient. So what we did is we brought together, to begin with, half a dozen of the major language services to provide a core content of video on a daily basis. So overnight, we set up a team that had Spanish speaking, Portuguese speaking, Arabic speaking, Persian speaking, Urdu speaking, Russian speaking journalists all working together, most of whom had never worked outside their own services and certainly never worked together, to create video content that we would share across all their language services.
Yeah.
So edit it once, ideally. Not always possible, because it takes longer to say some things in some languages than in others, but generally quite possible. And distribute it across the language services. And this has grown and grown within the BBC, and it works to this day on this kind of hub system. But we also,
what an achievement.
Well, it was great. Amazing. It was probably my favorite ever job at the BBC, actually. But we also developed some fantastic data visualizations for these language services. I think the first one we ever did was on to go in a series called The Power of Asia. And it was sounded like a really dry topic. It was about how China has come to dominate the production of something called rare earth materials. And rare earth materials go into all sorts of things like
mobile phones and things.
Exactly. Yeah. Lenses for cameras. So it sounded really, really dry, but actually it was done as a fantastic data visualization with very funky graphics and music, very minimal text. And the reason for that is with minimal text, you were able to remake it in multiple languages.
Yeah.
So we ended up, I think the first one we ever made, we made in 10 different languages. And making one took a long time. Remaking it in different languages took 2 or 3 hours probably. And the language services had never seen this kind of stuff. They'd never had this kind of stuff. They didn't have the time and the resource to make it themselves. So that was great. That was transformational for them, and that was very exciting. So I know exactly what you mean about graphics that move right to left as opposed to left to right, because we would make these for the Arabic service, for instance, amongst others.
So just going back to 2019, or going forward to 2019, when you planned out the communication strategies, or you planned out a communication strategy, how much of that content creation was video based?
Not an enormous amount at that stage, but a growing amount. And the reason for that was the direction of the strategy was changing. So when at this point I was working for the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and historically, I think in sexual and reproductive health and rights, most of the bodies working in it had been convinced that the tide of history was flowing their way, that they were good, liberal, tolerant, progressive individuals, and that was the direction that we were traveling, including in sexual and reproductive health and rights. And the rise of populist political figures and the kind of pushback against that kind of progressive politics and progressive social change came as a rude shock and a rude awakening. And in sexual reproductive health and rights, one of the places you see that most is around abortion. For instance, the rise of anti-abortion movement in the States, where historically there was no division between Republican and Democratic politicians and supporters. They were all united in support of access to abortion. So, Richard Nixon famously was a supporter of Planned Parenthood when he was president of the United States. Over time, that has changed radically. So, the Republican Party now is pretty much entirely anti-abortion. So what we realized was that we had to find a way to push back against that. And that meant the audiences we're appealing to, we wanted them to not just be passive recipients of what we were doing, we wanted them to engage with the communications we were providing, and in an ideal world, do more than just engage. So, stage one would be look at this stuff. Stage two would be get involved in some way, at least engage with it, at least put it out again, widen widen our sphere by reposting our stuff. After that, as a charity and NGO, do you want to donate? And after that, do you want to become a campaigner yourself? Are you going to become a campaigner? Because it's being passive is, it's nice if you see our stuff, but being passive isn't going to help as much as we'd like you to help, because this is now a fight. This kind of stuff is being rolled back. Poland is another good example in Europe where we've seen this. So increasingly video became important there because it's a fantastic engagement tool, and it's a really good medium for getting people involved. People post their own videos, without thinking about it almost now on a minute by minute
changed.
basis. And it's been a revolution, of course, and social media has provided that. The fact that everybody now has a video camera in their hand, it's called their telephone, their smartphone, and they use it all the time. So it became much more important to us. Partly it's the revolution around smartphones, but partly also it was the kind of rise of populist politicians and the pushback against the progressive agenda that needed to be countered. And video is a really powerful tool in doing that. And you only have to look at what's going on at the moment in Ukraine to see how engagement with the story is very strongly through video.
Yeah. So if you were, you work for global companies. If you were, I have a small business. I've come to you, and it's like, how do I build a communication strategy for a business? How do you do it? You've got a massive agenda, and you're juggling things and multilingual, but really, really get down to it. How do you
start by asking, I think, some really simple questions, like, firstly, what's your business strategy? Because your communication strategy has to be shaped in support of that overall business strategy. What are you trying to achieve? Once you know that, as a business, you should be able to fashion a communication strategy in support of your business objectives. Who are your stakeholders? Who are you trying to reach with your communications? Narrow it down. What do you want those stakeholders to do? How do you want to influence them to act? And these are all, really simple, basic questions that you ask at the very start of putting together a communication strategy. And that varies enormously depending on the kind of organization you are, of course. Let's say you're an organization selling soft drinks. You're a business to consumer organization.
Yeah.
What you want people to do is buy your soft drinks. How and why do you want them to do that? Is the question. One of my favorite examples, actually, in comms strategy is Red Bull. So Red Bull was originally, I think, a Thai company that sold a kind of a caffeine drink as a health drink, and I think it was originally sold through pharmacies. So it was almost sold as a health product, and it has been transformed, not because it's a very different product, but because of the way it's marketed and branded. And that has made it the second biggest drinks brand on the planet after Coke. And that's entirely because they looked and said, who could we sell this to? Actually, the kind of people who sell this to is people who are time poor, who want to pick me up, who want Red Bull because it's exciting, and the caffeine actually is something that they think, I need that. I need to pick me up. It's like a coffee but in a tin. What's the market for that? It's go-getters, it's younger people. How are we going to appeal to them? Well, extreme sports, Formula One. I'm absolutely certain that because it's still a family company, they were willing to spend the kinds of money in marketing and branding that I think quite a lot of shareholder companies might not have been willing to spend, because it's massive. It must be hundreds of millions that they're spending. But the results are astonishing. Everybody now knows what Red Bull is. Everybody in the world, pretty much. And you know, they did it really, really cleverly. I think they said, okay, these are the people we're going to sell to. What's going to make them buy? And what they did is decide that what we're selling is a lifestyle. We're not selling, you know, a tin of drink. We're selling excitement.
So they're not focusing on the product. The product has to be great anyway, has to do what it's meant to do. And this is taking it on to communicate.
Yeah, but that's, you know, that's a B2C company. So, you know, my previous job at IPPF, although we represented national partners, so that was kind of more B2B. We also reached out directly. We also reached directly to advocates, to activists. So that was kind of B2C. Right. So that was a mixture, and that can be really difficult because you're trying to do, you know, two different things at the same time with your content. That gets really complicated. But you know, fast selling consumer goods, it's fairly clear who your stakeholders are, what you're trying to do. You know, you're selling them a lifestyle in the hope that they were going to, you know, buy more of your product.
Now, I'm really aware that I've stolen so much of your time, and I just want you just to sum up your plans for 2022. So looking ahead to this year.
So my plans for 2022 to help build up knowledge and understanding for our stakeholders of what NewGlobe does, of the success of the individual programs. And they have been really successful, and fantastic credit to the politicians and the education bodies that lead those programs. And to increase understanding in our market, the kind of stakeholders we're appealing to, in how that is done and how it can be done. And you know, we have, as NewGlobe, the experience and the ability to support governments who want to transform education. We'd like to work with more governments to do that, because there's an awful lot of work to be done, because there are so many children in the world who are still not learning, and that is a disaster. It's a disaster for them, but it's also a disaster for their communities, their societies, for their countries. So you know, that's what I'd like to do in 2022.
Brilliant. And video in 2022?
Yeah, increasingly important. Again, depending, I think, on who your stakeholders are. So our community schools program, the video there is very much around individual children, individual teachers, because they are their market is primarily our parents. You know, you want parents to send your kids to this school, and what parents want to see is how well other kids are doing. If your stakeholders are governments, then it's a bit different. The kind of video they're interested in will be the kind of video that explains how your systems work.
Interesting.
So they're probably much more technical.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for so much insight, and you're really generous with your time. Thank you, Marek.
A pleasure. Very nice speaking to you.
Real pleasure meeting you.
You too,
bye-bye, and I'm going to play out. We've got some end credits to play. So, yeah, thank you so much.
A pleasure.